Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates spent weekends at the mall, she was at the local gun range with her father, learning to shoot tin cans and paper targets. Her father, a former Marine, believed every person should know how to protect themselves. What he didn't expect was how naturally shooting came to his daughter. By age 16, Sarah could outshoot most of the men at the range. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled, and her focus laser-sharp. But in a town where women were expected to marry young and start families, her skills were seen as unusual rather than impressive. Teachers would shake their heads when she talked about joining the military instead of going to college like her mother wanted. After high school, Sarah shocked everyone by enlisting in the Navy. Her parents were worried sick, but Sarah had made up her mind. She wanted to serve her country and prove that women could be just as tough as men. Boot camp was brutal, but Sarah pushed through every challenge. She ran faster, shot better, and showed more determination than many of her male counterparts. During her second year of service, Sarah was stationed at a naval base in Virginia. She worked in communications, but her real passion remained marksmanship. Every chance she got, she would head to the base firing range to practice. The other sailors knew about her skills, and word began to spread about the young woman who could hit targets that others missed by miles. One scorching hot Tuesday afternoon, Sarah was at the range, practicing with her standard-issue pistol. The range was mostly empty except for a few sailors taking their mandatory training sessions. She was focused on her breathing, lining up her sights with a target 50 yards away, when she heard boots approaching behind her. "Mind if I watch?" came a calm voice. Sarah lowered her weapon and turned around. Standing behind her was a tall, muscular man with short-cropped hair and intense blue eyes. He wore standard Navy fatigues, but something about his presence seemed different. There was a quiet confidence about him that she had only seen in a few people. "Sure," Sarah replied, raising her pistol again. She took aim and fired 6 rounds in quick succession. All 6 shots hit the bullseye, with 5 of them clustered so tightly they looked like one hole. The man whistled softly. "That's some shooting." "I'm Mark," he said, extending his hand. "Sarah," she replied, shaking his firm grip. "How long have you been shooting?" Mark asked, studying the target through his binoculars. "Since I was 8. My dad taught me," Sarah answered, reloading her magazine with practiced ease. Mark nodded thoughtfully. "You interested in trying something a bit more challenging?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering immediately, Mark walked to his gear bag and pulled out a rifle she had never seen before. It was sleek, black, and looked far more advanced than anything she had trained with. "This is a military precision rifle," he said, "effective range of about 800 meters in the right hands." Sarah's eyes widened. "I've never shot anything like that." "Would you like to try?" Mark asked. "I've been watching you shoot, and I think you might have a natural talent for longer range work." Sarah hesitated for a moment. She was curious about the rifle, but she also wondered why this stranger was offering to let her use such an expensive weapon. "Why would you let me try your rifle?" "You don't even know me." Mark smiled slightly. "Let's just say I'm always looking for people with potential. My team values skill over everything else." "Your team?" Sarah asked. "I work in special operations," Mark replied simply. "We're always recruiting talented shooters." Sarah's heart began to race. Special operations meant elite units, the kind of teams that carried out the most dangerous and important missions. She had dreamed about being part of something like that since joining the Navy, but she never thought she would actually get the chance. "Okay," she said finally. "Show me how it works." Mark spent the next hour teaching Sarah the basics of the precision rifle. He showed her how to adjust the scope, how to account for wind and distance, and how to control her breathing for longer shots. Sarah was amazed by how different it felt from pistol shooting. Everything had to be more precise, more calculated. "The target we're going to try is 300 meters out," Mark explained, pointing to a barely visible circle downrange. "Take your time, focus on your fundamentals, and squeeze the trigger slowly." Sarah settled into a prone position, the rifle feeling heavy but solid in her hands. She peered through the scope, adjusting her position until the target came into clear focus. The crosshairs seemed to dance slightly with each heartbeat, so she concentrated on timing her shot between beats. She took a deep breath, let half of it out, and gently squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked back against her shoulder with more force than she expected, but she maintained her position to watch the shot. "Hit," Mark called out, lowering his binoculars. "Dead center." Sarah couldn't believe it. She had hit a target 300 meters away on her first try, with a rifle she had never used before. The feeling was incredible. A mixture of pride, excitement, and something else she couldn't quite name. "Try it again," Mark said. "This time, I want you to hit the same spot." Sarah loaded another round and settled back into position. This shot felt even better than the first. She was more relaxed, more confident. When she fired, she knew before Mark even checked that she had hit her mark. "Same hole," Mark confirmed. "That's remarkable for someone with no long-range training." They continued shooting for another hour, with Sarah hitting targets at increasingly longer distances. By the end of the session, she was consistently hitting targets at 500 meters, a distance that many trained snipers struggled with. As they packed up the equipment, Mark turned to Sarah with a serious expression. "Sarah, have you ever considered advanced training? Special operations training?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "I've thought about it. But I never believed it was really possible for someone like me." "Someone like you?" Mark asked. "A woman," Sarah replied honestly. "I know things are changing, but special ops is still mostly a man's world." Mark nodded. "You're right that it's challenging for women. The physical standards are extreme, and the culture can be tough. But what I saw today tells me you have something special. Natural shooting ability like yours is rare." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and fear. This was everything she had dreamed about, but it also meant leaving behind everything familiar and entering a world she knew very little about. "What would it involve?" she asked. "First, you would need to pass initial screening," Mark explained. "Physical fitness tests, psychological evaluations, background checks. Then, if you're selected, you'd go through months of intensive training. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do, and most people don't make it through." Sarah looked out at the targets they had been shooting. 6 months ago, she was filing paperwork and answering radio calls. Now, a special operations soldier was offering her a chance to join an elite team. It seemed almost too good to be true. "Why me?" she asked. "You just met me today." Mark was quiet for a moment. "In my line of work, you learn to recognize potential quickly. What you did today, hitting those targets on your first try with an unfamiliar weapon, that's not just skill, that's natural ability combined with the right mindset. Those qualities can't be taught." As they walked back toward the base, Sarah's mind was racing. She thought about her parents, who would be terrified if they knew she was considering something even more dangerous than regular Navy service. She thought about her comfortable job in communications, where the biggest risk was getting a paper cut. But mostly, she thought about the feeling she had experienced while shooting that rifle. For the first time since joining the military, she felt like she was doing something she was truly meant to do. The precision, the challenge, the complete focus required, it all felt natural to her. "How long do I have to decide?" Sarah asked, as they reached the parking area. "Take your time," Mark replied. "But don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often." He handed her a business card with just a phone number on it. "When you're ready, call that number and ask for Mark. They'll know how to reach me." That night, Sarah lay awake in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. Her roommate was snoring softly in the next bed, completely unaware that Sarah's entire future might have changed that afternoon. She pulled out the business card and studied it in the dim light filtering through the window. Part of her wanted to call immediately and say yes. The shooting had been the most alive she had felt since joining the military. But another part of her was terrified. Special operations meant danger, secrecy, and a level of commitment that would change her life forever. Sarah thought about her father and how proud he had been when she enlisted. He had always believed she could do anything she set her mind to. She wondered what he would think about this opportunity. Probably scared for her safety, but proud that she was being recognized for her abilities. As the hours passed, Sarah found herself thinking less about the risks and more about the possibilities. She had joined the military to serve her country and challenge herself. This was exactly the kind of challenge she had been looking for, even if she hadn't realized it at the time. By morning, her decision was made. She would call Mark and begin the process of applying for special operations training. She didn't know if she would be accepted, and she didn't know if she could handle the training if she was. But she knew she had to try. Sarah's journey was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would test every limit she thought she had and reveal capabilities she never knew she possessed. The young woman from small-town Texas was about to discover what she was truly capable of when everything was on the line. Sarah made the call 3 days later. Her hands were shaking as she dialed the number, but her voice was steady when someone answered with a simple, "Yes? This is Petty Officer Martinez. I'm looking for Mark. Hold, please." After what felt like forever, Mark's familiar voice came on the line. "Sarah, I was hoping you'd call. Have you made your decision?" "Yes, sir. I want to apply for the program." "Good. Report to Building 347 at 0600 tomorrow morning. Wear your PT gear and bring nothing else." "Oh. And Sarah? Don't mention this to anyone. Not your roommate, not your friends, not your family. Understood?" "Understood, sir." The next morning, Sarah stood outside Building 347 inches, the pre-dawn darkness. The building looked ordinary from the outside, just another concrete structure on the sprawling naval base. But Sarah knew that whatever happened behind those doors would change her life forever. Mark appeared at exactly 0600, accompanied by 2 other men Sarah didn't recognize. All 3 wore plain military fatigues with no rank insignia or name tags. "Follow me," Mark said without any greeting. They led Sarah through a maze of corridors to a small office where a stern-looking woman in her 40s sat behind a desk covered with paperwork. "This is Commander Walsh," Mark explained. "She oversees candidate screening." Commander Walsh looked up from her papers and studied Sarah with sharp green eyes. "Petty Officer Martinez, I've reviewed your service record. Exemplary marks in communications, top scores in marksmanship, excellent physical fitness scores. But this program is unlike anything you've experienced." She stood and walked around the desk, stopping directly in front of Sarah. "The failure rate is 90%. Most candidates wash out in the first 2 weeks. Those who make it past the initial phase face months of training that will push you beyond every limit you think you have." Sarah met her gaze steadily. "I understand, ma'am. Do you?" Commander Walsh asked. "Because understanding it intellectually and living it are 2 very different things. You'll be away from everyone you know for months. You'll be pushed physically and mentally until you want to quit every single day. And if you do quit, there's no shame in it. But there's also no coming back." "I'm ready, ma'am," Sarah replied. Commander Walsh smiled slightly for the first time. "We'll see. Your training begins in 1 week. Until then, you'll continue your regular duties. But you're not to discuss this with anyone. Is that clear?" "Yes, ma'am." The week that followed was the longest of Sarah's life. She went through her normal routine, working in communications, eating in the mess hall, maintaining her equipment. But everything felt different. She found herself studying her fellow sailors, wondering if any of them had ever been given an opportunity like this. Her roommate, Jessica, noticed she was acting strange. "You've been really quiet lately," Jessica said one evening as they got ready for bed. "Everything okay?" "Just thinking about my next assignment," Sarah replied. Which was technically true. "Where do you think you'll go next?" Jessica asked. Sarah shrugged. "Wherever the Navy needs me." Finally, the day arrived. Sarah reported to Building 347 with a single bag containing the few personal items she was allowed to bring. This time, there were 5 other candidates waiting outside. All men, all looking nervous but determined. Mark appeared with 2 other instructors Sarah hadn't seen before. One was a mountain of a man with a shaved head and arms covered in tattoos. The other was smaller but moved with the fluid grace of a natural athlete. "Gentleman and lady," Mark began, Welcome to the beginning of the hardest 6 months of your lives. My name is Instructor Thompson. This is Instructor Rodriguez and Instructor Chen. For the duration of your training, we are your world. You will eat when we tell you to eat, sleep when we tell you to sleep, and train when we tell you to train. He paused, studying each candidate carefully. Some of you think you're here because you're tough. Some think you're here because you're smart. Some think you're here because you can shoot. You're all wrong. You're here because we believe you might have the potential to join one of the most elite fighting forces in the world. Whether you actually do have that potential remains to be seen. The first phase of training was called selection, and it lived up to its name. For 2 weeks, the candidates were pushed through a series of physical and mental challenges designed to weed out those who couldn't handle the pressure. The days began at 0400 with a 5-mile run in full gear. Sarah had always been in good shape, but running with a 40-pound pack while trying to keep up with men who had longer legs and more upper body strength was brutal. Her lungs burned, her legs felt like lead, and every step was a battle against the voice in her head telling her to quit. After the run came calisthenics. Push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, and dozens of other exercises designed to test muscular endurance. Then came weapons training, where candidates learned to field strip and reassemble various firearms blindfolded. Then combat swimming, where they treaded water for hours while carrying heavy equipment. But the physical challenges were only part of selection. The instructors also put the candidates through psychological tests, designed to break down their mental defenses. They were deprived of sleep, subjected to constant stress, and forced to make split-second decisions under extreme pressure. By the end of the first week, 2 candidates had quit. One simply walked away during a particularly brutal workout, saying he couldn't take any more. The other was removed after breaking down during a stress position exercise where candidates had to hold painful positions for hours while instructors yelled at them. Sarah wanted to quit a dozen times during those first 2 weeks. Her body ached constantly. She was operating on 3 hours of sleep per night, and the instructors seemed to take special pleasure in making her life miserable. Because she was the only woman, she felt like she had to prove herself twice as hard as the men. During one particularly difficult exercise, the candidates were required to carry a 200-pound dummy across an obstacle course while under simulated enemy fire. Sarah was paired with Jake, one of the larger male candidates, and they were struggling to coordinate their movements. "Come on, Martinez," Instructor Rodriguez shouted over the sound of blank ammunition being fired around them. "Your teammate is bleeding out! Move faster!" Sarah's arms felt like they were going to fall off, but she adjusted her grip and pushed harder. She and Jake managed to complete the course, but barely. "Not good enough," Rodriguez yelled as they collapsed at the finish line. "In a real situation, your teammate would be dead. Again." They ran the exercise 3 more times before Rodriguez was satisfied with their performance. As Sarah lay gasping on the ground afterward, she wondered if she was crazy for putting herself through this. But then she remembered the feeling of hitting those targets on the rifle range with Mark. She remembered the sense of purpose and belonging she had felt in that moment. That memory kept her going when everything else told her to quit. The second week of selection focused more on teamwork and leadership. The remaining candidates, Sarah, Jake, and 2 others named Mike and Torres, were given increasingly complex scenarios that required them to work together under pressure. During one exercise, they were dropped in a remote area with minimal equipment and told to navigate to a specific location while avoiding enemy patrols played by other soldiers. Sarah found herself naturally taking charge of navigation while Jake handled communications and the others managed security. "Martinez," Instructor Chen said during a break in the exercise, "you're showing good instincts for small unit leadership. Keep it up." It was the first positive feedback Sarah had received since training began, and it gave her the confidence boost she desperately needed. The final test of selection was a 50-mile forced march carrying full gear. The candidates had to complete it in under 18 hours while navigating through difficult terrain and solving problems along the way. It was designed to push them to their absolute physical and mental limits. Sarah's feet were bloody and blistered within the first 10 miles. Her pack felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and every muscle in her body screamed for relief. But she kept putting one foot in front of the other, focusing on the candidate ahead of her and refusing to fall behind. Around mile 30, Jake started showing signs of heat exhaustion. He was stumbling and slurring his words, clearly in distress. Sarah and the others immediately moved to help him, sharing his load and keeping him moving. "We don't leave anyone behind," Sarah said when Mike suggested they might have to abandon Jake to make the time limit. "We all finish together, or we all fail together." They managed to get Jake through the march, finishing with just minutes to spare. All 4 remaining candidates had passed selection. But Sarah knew this was just the beginning. The next phase of training was called the qualification course, and it would last for 4 months. This was where candidates learned the actual skills they would need as special operations soldiers. The physical training continued, but now it was combined with advanced weapons training, explosives handling, foreign languages, survival skills, and dozens of other specialized subjects. Sarah discovered she had a natural aptitude for many of these skills. Her marksmanship continued to improve, and she became one of the best snipers in her class. She also excelled at languages, quickly picking up basic conversational Arabic and Spanish. Most importantly, she learned to think tactically, seeing situations from multiple angles and anticipating potential problems before they arose. The instructors gradually revealed more about what their unit actually did. They were part of an elite team that conducted high-risk missions around the world. Hostage rescues, counter-terrorism operations, reconnaissance behind enemy lines, and other classified activities that required the highest levels of skill and discretion. The missions we undertake often depend on a single person making a perfect shot at the perfect moment, Instructor Thompson explained during one of their advanced marksmanship sessions. "There's no room for error, no second chances. When you pull that trigger, lives hang in the balance." Sarah understood the weight of that responsibility, and it motivated her to train even harder. She spent extra hours on the range, perfecting her technique and pushing her limits. She studied ballistics, learned to read wind patterns, and practiced shooting in every conceivable condition. But it wasn't just about individual skills. The team had to function as a single unit, each member knowing their role and trusting their teammates completely. Sarah learned to communicate with hand signals, move silently through hostile terrain, and coordinate complex operations with split-second timing. The mental aspects of the training were just as important as the physical ones. Sarah and her teammates underwent psychological conditioning designed to help them perform under extreme stress. They practiced making life-or-death decisions with incomplete information and learned to compartmentalize fear and doubt. As the months passed, Sarah felt herself changing. She became more confident, more focused, more aware of her surroundings at all times. The scared young woman who had first picked up Mark's rifle seemed like a different person entirely. Near the end of the qualification course, the candidates were given their final test, a simulated mission that would determine whether they were ready for real operational deployment. They would have to infiltrate a hostile compound, neutralize several targets, rescue a hostage, and extract safely, all while being pursued by a superior force. The mission was scheduled to take place in 3 days, and Sarah knew it would be the most important test of her life. Everything she had learned, everything she had endured, came down to this single operation. As she cleaned her rifle that night, preparing for the final test, Sarah thought about how far she had come from that day on the firing range. She was no longer just a communications specialist with good aim. She was becoming something she had never imagined possible. A warrior trained to operate at the highest levels of military expertise. Tomorrow would determine if she had what it took to join the ranks of America's most elite soldiers. The final test began at midnight on a moonless Thursday. Sarah and her 3 teammates were inserted by helicopter into a remote training facility that had been designed to replicate a hostile compound in enemy territory. The hostage was actually an instructor playing the role, and the enemies were seasoned special operations soldiers who would show no mercy. Sarah's heart pounded as she checked her equipment one final time. She carried her sniper rifle, a sidearm, explosives, communication gear, and enough ammunition for an extended firefight. Everything had to work perfectly, because failure meant starting the entire training program over from the beginning. Remember, Jake whispered as they crept through the darkness toward their target. "We've trained for this 100 times. Trust your training. Trust each other, and we'll get through this." The compound was a collection of concrete buildings, surrounded by high walls and guard towers. Intelligence reports indicated that the hostage was being held in the central building, but they would have to neutralize the perimeter guards first without raising an alarm. Sarah positioned herself on a hill 400 meters from the compound while her teammates moved closer to the walls. Her job was to provide overwatch and eliminate any threats that her teammates couldn't handle quietly. Through her scope, she could see guards patrolling the walls and manning the towers. "Sniper 1 in position," she whispered into her radio. "Copy, Sniper 1," Torres replied. He was serving as team leader for this mission. Beginning approach. Sarah watched through her scope as her teammates moved like shadows toward the compound. They had practiced this infiltration so many times that every movement was choreographed. Mike reached the wall first and used a small explosive charge to create a breach. The explosion was muffled, but Sarah knew the guards would investigate. Sure enough, 2 guards began moving toward Mike's position. Sarah adjusted her aim, controlling her breathing as she had been taught. The crosshairs settled on the first guard's chest. She squeezed the trigger gently, and the man dropped silently. Before his partner could react, Sarah had already shifted targets and fired again. 2 tangos down, she reported quietly. "Good shooting, Sniper 1. We're inside the perimeter." The next phase required the team to move through the compound while avoiding detection. Sarah watched from her elevated position, calling out guard movements and providing intelligence on the best routes to take. "Team 1, you have a patrol moving toward your position from the north," she warned. Her teammates immediately took cover behind a storage building. Sarah tracked the patrol through her scope, ready to engage if they discovered the infiltration team. The 3 guards walked within 10 feet of where Jake was hiding, but they passed without noticing anything unusual. As the team moved deeper into the compound, Sarah spotted a problem. A sniper had taken position in one of the guard towers, and he had a clear view of the route her teammates needed to take to reach the central building. "Team 1, be advised you have a sniper in Tower 3, Sarah reported. "Can you take him?" Torres asked. Sarah studied the shot through her scope. The sniper was partially concealed behind sandbags, and the angle was difficult. She would have to thread the bullet through a narrow gap while accounting for wind and the 400-meter distance. "Affirmative. Give me 30 seconds. Sarah adjusted her position slightly, using a small bipod to steady her rifle. She studied the wind flags and made minute adjustments to her scope. The target was barely visible, just a small portion of his head and shoulder exposed behind cover. This was the shot that would determine whether her teammates could complete their mission safely. Everything she had learned about precision shooting, breath control, and trigger discipline came together in this moment. Sarah took a deep breath, let half of it out, and gently squeezed the trigger. Through her scope, she saw the target slump forward. The threat had been eliminated. "Tower 3 neutralized," she reported. "Outstanding shooting, Sniper 1. Moving to the objective." The team reached the central building where the hostage was supposedly being held. But as they prepared to breach the door, Sarah spotted movement in the surrounding buildings. The enemy was setting up an ambush. "Team 1, abort! You're walking into a trap!" Sarah shouted into her radio. Her warning came just in time. As her teammates dove for cover, automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions around the compound. The enemy had been waiting for them to reach the building before springing their trap. "We're pinned down," Jake called over the radio. "We need immediate support." Sarah immediately began engaging targets, switching from precision shots to rapid fire as she tried to suppress the enemy positions. Her rifle barked repeatedly as she moved from target to target, forcing the enemy to take cover and giving her teammates a chance to maneuver. But there were too many enemies, and they had the team surrounded. Sarah realized they needed a new plan, and they needed it fast. "Team 1, can you reach the north side of the building?" she asked. "Negative. Too much fire," Torres replied. Sarah made a split-second decision that went against everything she had been taught about sniper tactics. Instead of staying in her overwatch position, she grabbed her gear and began moving down the hill toward the compound. "Sniper 1, What are you doing? Changing the odds, Sarah replied as she ran through the darkness. Sarah reached the compound wall and used the same breach Mike had created earlier. Instead of her long-range rifle, she switched to her sidearm and the carbine she carried as a backup weapon. This was going to be close-quarters combat, and she needed weapons better suited for that environment. She moved through the compound using the buildings for cover, flanking the enemy positions that had her teammates pinned down. The enemies were focused on the central building and didn't expect an attack from behind. Sarah appeared behind the first enemy position like a ghost. 3 soldiers were firing at her teammates from behind a concrete barrier. She engaged them quickly and efficiently, moving to the next position before they even realized what had happened. Team 1, pressure's off, you're 6 o'clock. Sarah reported as she continued moving. With the enemy distracted by Sarah's flanking attack, her teammates were able to advance toward their objective. But the mission was far from over. They still needed to rescue the hostage and extract safely. Torres and Mike reached the building where the hostage was being held, but found another problem. The door was rigged with explosives, and any attempt to breach it conventionally would kill the hostage inside. We need an alternative entry, Torres called out. Sarah studied the building from her position. There was a window on the second floor that appeared unguarded, but reaching it would require someone to climb the outside wall while under fire. I can reach the window, Sarah said. Cover me. Before anyone could object, Sarah was moving again. She sprinted across open ground while her teammates laid down suppressing fire, then began climbing the rough concrete wall of the building. Bullets chipped the wall around her as enemy soldiers tried to target her, but she kept climbing. Sarah reached the window and discovered it was unlocked. She slipped inside and found herself in a hallway that led to the room where the hostage was being held. But as she moved down the hall, she encountered 2 guards. The hallway was narrow, with no room to maneuver. Sarah reacted on pure instinct, engaging both guards before they could raise their weapons. Her training had prepared her for situations like this, where split-second reactions meant the difference between life and death. She reached the door to the hostage room and found it locked from the inside. Through the door, she could hear someone moving around. This was it, the culmination of months of training and the moment that would determine her future. Hostage room secured, Sarah whispered into her radio. Moving to extract the package. She carefully opened the door, weapon ready, and found the instructor playing the hostage tied to a chair in the center of the room. He looked surprised to see her. Well, Martinez, he said with a slight smile. I didn't expect you to be the one coming through that door. Sarah quickly cut his restraints while keeping watch for any remaining threats. Are you injured, sir? Negative. Ready for extraction. Team 1, package is secure. Moving to extraction point Alpha. The extraction phase proved just as challenging as the infiltration. The team had to move the hostage through the compound, while enemy reinforcements arrived on the scene. Sarah found herself alternating between her sniper role and close-quarters combat, as the situation demanded. At one point, they were forced to take cover in a storage building while enemy soldiers surrounded them. With ammunition running low and no clear escape route, the situation looked hopeless. We need a distraction, Torres said, studying their tactical situation. Sarah looked at the explosives in her pack. I can create one. But someone needs to cover the hostage while I set the charges. Do it, Torres ordered. Sarah placed explosive charges at strategic points around the compound, while her teammates held their position. When she detonated them, the resulting explosions created enough chaos for the team to reach their extraction point. The helicopter appeared on schedule, landing in a clearing just outside the compound. Sarah and her teammates ran toward it with their rescued hostage, while enemy soldiers fired at them from the compound walls. As they climbed aboard the helicopter, Sarah felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. They had completed the mission successfully, but more importantly, she had proven to herself and her instructors that she belonged in this elite unit. The helicopter lifted off, carrying them away from the training compound and toward their base. Sarah looked back at the fires still burning where her explosives had detonated, then at her teammates, who were grinning despite their exhaustion. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood at attention in a small ceremony room on the naval base. Commander Walsh stood before the 4 remaining candidates, holding certificates that represented months of the most challenging training any of them had ever experienced. "Petty Officer Martinez," Commander Walsh said, stepping in front of Sarah, "you have successfully completed Special Operations training. You are now qualified for assignment to classified missions requiring the highest levels of skill and dedication." As Sarah received her certificate, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a small-town girl shooting tin cans with her father, to a communications specialist on a naval base, to a fully qualified Special Operations soldier. It had been a transformation she could never have imagined. But Sarah knew this was just the beginning. Real missions would be far more dangerous and complex than any training exercise. The stakes would be actual lives, not just grades in a training program. Mark approached her after the ceremony, the same quiet confidence in his demeanor that she remembered from their first meeting on the firing range. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Like I've found what I was meant to do," Sarah replied honestly. Mark nodded. "Your first operational assignment begins in 2 weeks. You'll be deployed with a team to provide overwatch for a hostage rescue mission overseas. Are you ready for that?" Sarah thought about everything she had learned, everything she had endured, and everything she had proven about herself over the past months. She was no longer the uncertain young woman who had hesitated before making that first phone call. "Yes, sir," she said without hesitation. "I'm ready." As Sarah left the ceremony room, she carried with her more than just a certificate. She carried the knowledge that she had earned her place among America's elite warriors through skill, determination, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. The targets she would face now wouldn't be paper or metal. They would be real threats to real people who needed her protection. But Sarah Martinez was ready for that responsibility. She had found her calling, and she was prepared to answer it wherever and whenever her country needed her skills. The young woman who had once been just another sailor had become someone who could make the difference between life and death with a single, perfectly placed shot. Her journey from the firing range to the battlefield was complete. But her story as a special operations warrior was just beginning.